What's up, students? Welcome to a primary source walkthrough for History 1302. This week we have a speech given by President Ronald Reagan to the National Association of Evangelicals from March of 1983. So, a couple things here, just to kind of contextualize this speech, to give you a sense of where this happens and what's going on in the world. President Reagan has been in office for just over 2 years at this point after winning the 1980 election. This is prior to his campaign for re-election in 1984, an election he wins handily. If you look at the electoral college map, he loses only Minnesota and DC. I think it's one of the biggest landslides in election history. If we're calling the 2016 election a landslide for Donald Trump, and 2020 a landslide for Joe Biden. If you look at Reagan in 1984 and Nixon in 72, neither Trump or Biden come close to that at all. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Ronald Reagan is talking to a group of Christian evangelicals. Okay, so evangelical Christianity is a certain segment of Christianity, and even putting them all into one group is a bit problematic because there are different types of evangelical Christians. But evangelical Christianity is a fairly modern form of Christianity, to say the least. If you're comparing it to, say, Latin Christianity or Catholicism, Greek Christianity, Greek Orthodox Christianity, Coptic Christianity, etc., which are thousands of years old, evangelical Christianity is, historically speaking, only about 100 years old at this point. In its modern form. You could trace it back a little bit further. You could say that it's probably about 200 to 250 years old, confidently. In any case, this is a speech in which Ronald Reagan lays out some fundamental ideas of his political program. There's no, organized effort for a quote-unquote Reagan revolution. It's just Ronald Reagan, in many ways, exemplifies this move towards a different kind of conservatism that we've been reading about in this week's chapter, and in other primary sources. Reagan champions this kind of outlook, to say the least. He's not as confrontational as a Barry Goldwater or a Pat Buchanan, but nevertheless, they share some ideas in common. And one of the things that you'll notice about this particular speech is just how central religion is. And given his audience, that makes a lot of sense. But also, you have to consider just how much Christianity is playing a significant role in the shaping of this Reagan-style ideology. And it's important to keep that in the back of our minds as we go forward. So, As we dig in here, I don't want to spend too much time at the beginning, as he's really just kind of, introducing himself, and he opens by talking about Lincoln, and then he transitions to this joke about, a politician and a minister dying and going to heaven, and the minister has this simple one-room place, but the politician gets this giant mansion, and the politician's like, I don't deserve this. And the punchline is, well, Mr. Politician, you're the only politician who's ever made it to heaven. The joke is, and politicians are by nature evil and undeserving of Christian paradise. And Reagan runs as the anti-government guy. And Reagan had been in government. He was the governor of California. He had played politics for quite a while. He was central to some of the Red Scare stuff in the 1950s, for example. So he's not completely uninitiated. This isn't like Donald Trump, where Donald Trump had never held political office before becoming president of the United States. Ronald Reagan had held political office. But he kind of runs himself. He describes himself as this political outsider. He's not your typical politician, etc. So one of the things he says is that government is bad. I think the famous line is something along the lines of, there's nothing scarier than getting a knock at your door, opening it, and the person says, hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So there's that's where this movement conservatism comes in, where it's very not anti-government the way that like a militia might be anti-government, but certainly reducing the government, making it as small as fundamentally possible. So anyway, he goes on and he talks about religion in the early part of the American Republic. He talks about kind of how religion, particularly monotheism, influences the founding fathers. And one thing that I found really interesting is he says this. He says that only through your work and prayers and those millions of others can we hope to survive this perilous century and keep alive this experiment in liberty, this last best hope of man. Now, part of this is unremarkable. We've seen this time and time again in American history. John Winthrop says it very early on, like in 1630, where he calls New England the shining city on the hill. Thomas Paine calls the United States, what will become the United States, an asylum for mankind. This is an ideology that fuses into what the United States is supposed to be. So what Reagan's doing here is he's kind of going along with this. It's that last bit where he says the last best hope of man that's different. He's almost saying, you can see I put the word apocalyptic and underlined it at the right-hand side of the paragraph. He's almost making the argument that if the United States fails, mankind fails. That we will fall into rule by evil. And he's going to build on that going forward. So he starts talking a little bit about secularism, meaning kind of the absence of religion. Let's keep it simple and say that. And he says that secularists, people who don't have any kind of religious belief or turn away from religion, are radically different than most Americans. This is what he's saying here. And indeed, America is a very religious place, though, this is 1983. In 2000, I think Ronald Reagan would not would not be right. And numbers kind of bear that out, but do your research on that. And if I said the year 2000, I meant the year 2020. It's just been man, time means nothing anyway. What are we talking about? In any case, he goes on and he starts talking about abortion. And how abortion is a problem. And it's not just abortion that he's talking about here. He's also talking about illegitimate births, meaning children who are born to mothers not in wedlock. So, somebody, a woman who has sex and gets pregnant, but is not married to the father. And he kind of goes on this little riff about female sexuality, and we used to call them promiscuous, but now we just say that they're sexually active. He's kind of railing against what we would call political correctness. And if we want to translate this into real talk, he's saying, we just used to call those girls whores, and now they're just, sexually liberated. I mean, ladies, I'm sure you've heard this kind of rhetoric before. Meanwhile, gentlemen, you can go sleep with as many women as you want and get all the high fives in the world, and you'll be known as a player, maybe, but you aren't going to be talked down the same way that a woman is. But I think you know that. So he also talks a little bit about parents' rights. He ties this back into religion, specifically Judeo-Christian religion, and really, let's just say this. I could give you a whole lecture on how politically fraught this is, because evangelical Christians, in the main, respect Jews insofar as that they can be converted to Christianity. And if you read the book of Revelation, well, that's a whole nother conversation. But let's not get into it. Let's just not get into that. In any case, so he continues on and he talks about how religious tradition is being watered down in the United States. He invokes the First Amendment and saying the Founding Fathers never intended to construct a wall of hostility. Now, what I note there is that Jefferson obviously didn't say a wall of hostility between church and state. What he said was that there should be a firm wall of separation between church and state. Madison follows him on this too. You can read their writings to confirm that if you don't believe me. Now, he says that the First Amendment was designed to protect churches from government interference. And he's right. The First Amendment does do that. But the First Amendment also prevents the government from establishing a national religion. Okay, so in the First Amendment, there's the Establishment Clause, and there is the Free Exercise Clause. If you read the First Amendment, what it says is that the Congress, the government, shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion, meaning that the government cannot set up a national religion tied to the state. Okay, they don't want to do what England did, and the Church of England goes hand in hand with the state, at least at the time. Now, not so much, but at the time when the Constitution was written, that was indeed the case. So that's the Establishment Clause. Then there's the Free Exercise Clause, which says, okay, the Establishment Clause first, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, comma, or prevent the free exercise thereof. That or prevent the free exercise thereof That is the free exercise clause, meaning that you are allowed to practice whatever religion you want to without government interference. So Reagan's right here. He just leaves out the whole part where the government cannot establish a religion. And constitutional scholars, Supreme Court justices, etc., go back and forth on which one matters more. They're both in there. Sometimes you could see them as contradictory. Sometimes you can see them as complementary. It's something to consider. He goes on and he talks a little bit about, the central role that religion plays in the foundation of the United States. Like Jefferson refers to the supreme being in his Declaration of Independence. In God We Trust is on our coinage, etc. There's lots of religion infused into our government. None of it's a national religion, and you may choose how much you participate in it or not participate in it. I know some Congress people who are not Christian get sworn in on other. You're supposed to, when you get sworn in, you have to swear in on something holy or really important to you. So, like, if you're a Christian and you're getting sworn into Congress, chances are you're going to put your hand on a Bible when you swear your oath. Now, if you are a Muslim, you're not going to put it on the Christian Bible. You're going to put your hand on a Quran. Or if you are a Hindu, you're going to put your hand on the Vedas, maybe, or the Bhagavad Gita, or some other holy text. If you are an atheist, maybe you swear in on your favorite novel. I don't know. I've never had to be sworn in for anything before, but regardless. So, it's again, there's no established religion, even though religion infuses a lot of our founding documents. He talks about prayer in school. There is no constitutional amendment that restores prayer to public schools. This didn't pass. But that isn't to say that there is no prayer in school. You can pray in school, ladies and gentlemen. You do it every single day in Texas. And it comes when there's the moment of silence. Okay, when I worked at a high school, we said the U.S. pledge, we said the Texas pledge, and then there was a moment of silence. And I believe there's a state law that mandates how long that moment of silence has to be. I think it's like 90 seconds or something like that. So something to think about. The stipulation with schools is that no teacher or administrator can organize a specific prayer. If students want to do that, that's perfectly okay. You can do that. And I saw students do it all the time. If you want to say a little prayer over your lunch before you eat it, that's your prerogative. No one can stop you from doing it. It just can't be organized by the school. Anyway, this is becoming a really long video. Let's wrap up here, as we're only about halfway through the speech. He talks about abortion again. And he when he's talking here, right here, more than a decade ago, a Supreme Court decision literally wiped off the books of 50 state statute protecting the rights of unborn children. He's talking about Roe versus Wade there, the landmark decision in 1972 that made abortion completely legal in all 50 states. He's railing against that here. He talks again about how most of the American public believe in this kind of Judeo-Christian set of beliefs, whether they're Jews or they're Christians. there are many more Christians than there are Jews in the United States. Yeah. In any case, now he continues on, and he starts talking about some other stuff, and he kind of mentions looking at the positive side of American history, and excuse me, but he's also mentioning that even though we've accomplished good things, it's not government that's going to perfect man, because we live with sin. Again, he's talking to evangelical Christians. He's speaking their language here. And he's mentioning that a few failures of government. A failure to provide minority citizens with equal rights. There's no room for racism, anti-Semitism, or any ethnic or racial hatred in this country. Which, he's right. Do his policies actually reflect that? That's up to you to decide. I think his handling of the AIDS epidemic is something to think about. I also think his intervention in Latin America is something to think about. But that's for you to think through on your own. So he continues on, and he really wants to emphasize this positive view of American history, and he is returning to the well of religion. And he says, look, we have a mortal enemy in the Soviet Union. And one of the things that the Soviet Union believes in is secularism. That they are based on the idea that we can't have morality that proceeds from supernatural ideas. That religion shouldn't guide our morals, but class conception should. And he says this makes us polar opposites. We start in the United States from religious morality and go from there, where the Soviets don't have any religion. Okay, they have no room for it. And he's starting to set up this kind of Cold War rhetoric, this late Cold War rhetoric, where it's like, all right, well, you as evangelical Christians should support our efforts against the Soviet Union. And he goes in and he starts talking about a nuclear freeze, excuse me. I'm not trying to be George Bush here and say nuclear. Nuclear is how you pronounce that word. In any case, he's saying, he's talking about a strong military, and that this is going to be a way that we can protect our freedoms. As long as the Soviets exist, as long as there's this threat, we have to have a strong arsenal. We don't want it. Okay, we don't, we want to live, God willing, which he'll say later, in a nuclear-free world. But he's saying right now, if we stop stockpiling nuclear weapons, the Soviets become stronger and we can't let them win. And he tells this really kind of sad story about this man who's like, well, I would rather my daughter die still being a God-believing person than having to be a communist and not believing in God. That's pretty intense. He closes with talking about something called the Screw Tape Letters. If you grew up in an evangelical household or a Christian household at all, you probably have heard of C.S. Lewis before. If you've not heard of C.S. Lewis in that respect, C.S. Lewis is the person who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. So if you've read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or seen one of the movies, that's who wrote it. He wrote another book called The Screw Tape Letters, and the Screw Tape C.S. Lewis wrote a lot of books. One of those books is The Screw Tape Letters, and The Screw Tape Letters is a back and forth between a administrative demon named Screwtape. Okay, he's not quite Satan, but he's one of the higher up ones in this fictional story. And the Screwtape, the demon, is writing with another lesser demon about how to tempt man and make men evil. And Screwtape is here, which Reagan is quoting, saying like, it's not a monster who's the most evil person in the world. It's the quiet men with white collars and smooth cut faces and all of that. These bureaucrats who are the evilest. And it's kind of an interesting tie to this picture of a big government that Reagan says is evil. Kind of a nice coda for his speech. And so, as you're thinking through, like, what is this Reagan revolution? Think about the big tenets of this speech. He's talking about morality and moral authority, which, stems from things like abortion and women's chastity, things like keeping religion centered in society, things like prayer, school prayer in particular, and freedom, etc. And they all kind of proceed from this religious place. So, stuff to think about. I suggest reading the Screwtape Letters if you've never done it before. If you've never read it before, it's fascinating. It's, as somebody who has spent time studying the Christian mythology of the devil, for at least in the medieval world, the Screwtape Letters kind of got me interested in that vein of thinking, which is a totally different story. In any case, this thing is almost 30 minutes long, almost twice the normal length of one of these primary source walkthroughs. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. It's a long speech. It's a long document to read, but it's full of a lot of really interesting information. And if you're looking for, an explanation of what this kind of evangelical movement conservatism is all about, like, this is a really good blueprint for what that looks like. And, as you go forward in American history and you look at these conservative voices, post-Reagan, big names like George W. Bush, and to some extent Donald Trump, who may not have a history that is that looks compatible with evangelical Christianity, but certainly knows how to appeal to evangelical Christians. A lot of evangelical Christians absolutely love Donald Trump. And for some people, that's a big mystery. Like, well, how could that be possible? But Trump knows how to speak their language. And there's a lot of it that comes not from this, but rings with this. And that's something to think about. So, if you have any questions about Reagan's Evil Empire speech, any questions about movement conservatism, don't hesitate to reach out to me in an email or stop by in office hours. And until next time, folks, stay healthy, and I will see you in the next one.